Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear student of second year, hello and welcome. Today is our date with a new lecture in which we will talk about the information related to the topic of deciduous teeth. Also, the lecture today is easy and smooth, but it contains a lot of important dental knowledge needed for successful dentist. And let me to begin. Lecture objectives. Identify the importances of deciduous dentition. Know the sequence of eruption of deciduous teeth. Describe the different types of deciduous teeth and differentiate between deciduous and permanent teeth, and know the space generated during deciduous dentition. مقدمة. Human oral cavity is categorized as heterodont and diffeodont. What's the meaning of heterodont and what's the meaning of diffeodont? Definition of heterodont. Heterodont means that the human mouth contains a teeth with different types, incisor, canine, premolar, and molar, and different shapes and sizes, and perform different specific functions. What is the definition of diffeodont? Diffeodont means that the human mouth contains two sets of teeth, one during the child period termed deciduous dentition, and the other for the adult and termed permanent dentition. Importances of deciduous teeth. There is a lot of importances of deciduous teeth as follows. Number one, mastication of food for maintenance of a proper diet needed for child growth. Number two, maintenance of normal facial appearance and craniofacial growth, and also growth of the skull as well. Number three, development of speech and pronunciation of letters. Number four, maintenance of the space needed for eruption of permanent teeth. Number five, act as a guide for eruption of permanent successor, and also act as a guide for eruption of the first permanent molar, وأخيرا prevent malocclusion of permanent teeth. ندخل في differences between deciduous and permanent teeth. Number one, general differences. Tooth number. Deciduous teeth are 20 in number, 5 in each quadrant. Upper right quadrant, upper left quadrant, lower right quadrant, lower left quadrant. In reverse, permanent teeth are 32 in number, 8 in each quadrant. Upper right, upper left, lower right, and lower left. Differences in teeth categories. Number one, deciduous teeth contain incisors A and B, canine C, molars D and E. Permanent teeth, incisors 1, 2, canine 3, premolars 4 and 5, and molars 6, 7, and 8. تذكر أن incisor and canine are termed anterior teeth, premolars and molars are termed posterior teeth. No premolars or third molars in deciduous teeth. Color of the crown. Deciduous teeth, the crown is whiter in color, as you see, while impermanent is yellowish in color. Size of deciduous teeth. Deciduous teeth is smaller in size than permanent teeth, as the measure appear. Crown length of deciduous teeth. The crown is smaller in size than the permanent teeth. This is the differences. Root length of deciduous teeth. The root of deciduous teeth is longer in relation to the crown length. And so the crown root ratio of deciduous teeth is 1 to 2, and the crown root ratio of permanent teeth is 1 to 1.5. Dental formula. This is the dental formula of deciduous teeth. Incisor 2 above and 2 below, canine 1 above and 1 below, molars 2 above and 2 below, and the permanent increased by the premolars 2 above and 2 below, and the molars is 3 above and 3 below. And there is a scientific new way of measurement of dental formula as follow. ICBM. I incisor, C canine, B premolar, and M molar. 2102 upper and 2102 lowers. And for permanent, 2123. 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 premolars, and 3 molars above, and 2123 for lower teeth. Differences between deciduous and permanent teeth from other way. Anatomical differences. Deciduous incisors contain no mamelon. Mamelons found only in newly erupted incisors. Posterior deciduous teeth contain narrow occlusal table. This is the occlusal table. All deciduous teeth has constricted neck. Crown elevations and depressions of deciduous teeth are more developed. The red arrow denote cusp, cervical ridge, cingulum, and lingual fossa. Crown of deciduous teeth has more supplemental groove. The red arrow denotes the supplemental grooves. All maximum contour of both labial, buccal, and lingual aspects are located at cervical third. The third way for differences between deciduous and permanent teeth. Histological differences. Deciduous teeth differs from permanent by the following. The enamel of deciduous teeth is thinner and less calcified. Also, both dentine and cementum of the deciduous teeth are thinner and less calcified. Bulb of deciduous teeth. The bulb chamber of deciduous teeth is larger in relation to crown size. The bulb horns related to the cusps are at higher position. The vascularity and the cellularity of the bulb are more active. Potentiality for repair is at higher level. ندخل بقى في موضوع تاني جميل جدا اسمه كرونولوجي، وده في غاية الأهمية. What is the sequence of eruption of both deciduous and permanent teeth? Sequence of eruption of deciduous teeth. The first tooth erupt in the oral cavity is mandibular central incisor at 6 months, followed by maxillary central incisor at 7 months, then mandibular lateral 8 months, maxillary lateral 9 months, and go to the mandibular first deciduous molar at 14 months, and followed by maxillary 16 months, and returned again to mandibular canine 18 months and maxillary canine 20 months, and lastly mandibular second deciduous molar 22 months and maxillary second deciduous molar 27 months. And so the summary of sequence of eruption of deciduous teeth begin by eruption of incisors, followed by first molars, then canine, and lastly second deciduous molars. And this is a very important knowledge. What is the conclusion of sequence of eruption of deciduous teeth? Number 1, mandibular central incisor is the first deciduous tooth erupting in the oral cavity. First deciduous molar erupt before deciduous canine. Deciduous tooth begin to erupt after formation of a half of the root length. Root complete its development after 1 to 1.5 years of tooth eruption. Root resorption of deciduous teeth begin 1 year before shedding, and shedding means elimination of deciduous teeth for the eruption of its permanent successor at specific time. Mandibular teeth erupt early than the maxillary teeth. This general knowledge. Girl erupt early than the boy, and teeth of left side erupt early than the teeth at right side. Question. How old of this child? This child contains only 2 mandibular central deciduous incisors, and so this child is 6 months old. Another questions. How old of this child? Another question. Question 3. How old of this girl? This girl completed the eruption of all deciduous teeth, and so this girl is more than 2 years old. Sequence of eruption of permanent teeth. The first permanent teeth to erupt in the oral cavity is the mandibular first permanent molar, followed by mandibular central incisors, then maxillary central, mandibular lateral, maxillary lateral, mandibular canine, mandibular first premolar, and the maxillary first premolar at the same time, mandibular second premolar and the maxillary second premolar at the same time, and then at 12-year the maxillary canine erupted. This is followed by the second permanent molar at 12 years and third molar at 18 years. And so, the mandibular first permanent molar erupt at 6 years, and plus another 6 years, the mandibular second permanent molar erupted at 12 years, and plus another 6 years, the third molar erupted at 18 years. What is the conclusion of eruption of permanent teeth? First permanent molar is the first permanent tooth erupting in the oral cavity. First permanent molar erupt easily because it does not have deciduous predecessor. Permanent tooth begin to erupt after formation of a half of the root length, and root complete its development after 2.5 to 3 years of tooth eruption. And go to question another again. How many teeth are there in the mouth of 14 years old person? مستني إجابتكم. Another question. How many and what types of teeth are in the mouth of 10 years old person? Another question. What are the teeth that begin calcification during the fetus stage? Descriptive anatomy. Deciduous incisors. Maxillary deciduous incisors. They differ from the permanent incisors by the following. Number 1, measurement. The crown of maxillary deciduous incisors is smaller. The crown of maxillary deciduous incisors is longer mesiodistally than incisocervically. This is the mesiodistal dimension, and this is the incisocervical length. And the reverse is true. The mesiodistal dimension of permanent central incisor is less than the incisocervical. All deciduous incisor has no mamelon. Mamelons only found in newly erupted permanent incisors. Mesial mamelon and the middle mamelon and the distal mamelon.
Crown elevations and crown depression. All crown elevations and depression are more developed in deciduous teeth as all, and in incisor in particular, like incisor ridge, mesial and distal marginal ridge, cervical ridge, and cingulum. Lastly, lingual fossa. Cervical line. All deciduous incisors has constricted neck. Root. The root of deciduous incisors is long in relation to the crown length. And measure about 1 crown to 2 root. And this is termed crown root ratio. بينما crown root ratio of permanent teeth measure 1 to 1.5. Mandibular deciduous central incisors. It differs from permanent central incisors by the following. كلام أعتقد إنه هيبقى متكرر بقى لأن إحنا قلناه في بداية المحاضرة وقلنا في maxillary central incisor. Measurement the crown of mandibular central incisor is the smallest all over the oral cavity. Crown elevation and depression are more developed. No mamelon. Proximal marginal ridge, cingulum, incisor ridges, and the lingual fossa and the cervical ridges are more developed. Cervical line, all deciduous incisors has constricted neck. The root is longer in relation to the crown length and measure about 1 to 2. Mandibular deciduous lateral incisor. It differs from central incisors by the crown of mandibular lateral incisor is wider and longer than the central incisors. Crown elevations and the crown depressions are more developed than in central one. Incisal edge is sloped distally, and the disto-incisal angle is more rounded. And the incisal edge not perpendicular to the long axis of the tooth. Deciduous canine. Maxillary. It differs from permanent namesake by smaller in size and constricted neck. Labiolingual dimension is greater than crown length. Crown length is the blue arrow and the labiolingual is the red arrow. More developed the crown elevations and depression. Cusp is more developed with sharp cusp tip. Mesial slope of the cusp is longer than distal slope. ودي خاصية موجودة في القناين ده بس. Maxillary deciduous canine. And also mesial slope is longer than distal slope in maxillary first premolar. Cusp tip is distal to line bisecting the tooth. Crown root ratio measure about 1 to 2, like any deciduous teeth. عشان تتأكد إن هي مهمة جدا. Mandibular deciduous canine. It differs from maxillary namesake boy, smaller in size. Mesiodistal dimension is greater. Labiolingual dimension is smaller. Crown elevations and the crown depression less developed. Mesial slope of the cusp is shorter than distal slope. Crown and root lengths are shorter. Deciduous molar. Maxillary deciduous first molar. The crown does not take the molar shape, but seems to be resemble premolar. The crown does not have a definite cusp forms. The maximum of convexity of both buccal and lingual outlines are located at cervical third. All primary maxillary molars have 3 diverged roots. The lingual root is the longest. Maxillary deciduous second molar. Primary maxillary second molar is larger than the first molar. Primary maxillary second molar is closely resembled to the permanent maxillary first molar, but is smaller. Maxillary second deciduous molar has cusp of carabelli. Mandibular deciduous first molar. As the maxillary deciduous first molar, the crown does not take the molar shape, but seems to be resemble premolar. The crown does not have a definite cusp form. Both maximum of convexity of buccal and lingual outlines are located at cervical third. The crown has 4 cusps. 2 mesial cusps are larger. All primary mandibular molars have 2 diverged roots, mesial and distal. Mandibular second deciduous molar. Mandibular second deciduous molar is larger than the first deciduous molar. Mandibular second deciduous molar is closely resembled to the permanent mandibular first molar, but is smaller. And so, it contains 5 cusps, 3 buccal cusps, mesiobuccal, distobuccal, and distal, and 2 lingual cusps, mesiolingual and distolingual. The 3 buccal cusps are equal in size and located buccally, unlike mandibular first permanent molars. Physiological spaces in deciduous dentition. دي آخر مرحلة في المحاضرة. Space termed leeway space. Definition. Leeway space is the space generated from the differences between the sum of mesiodistal weights of deciduous molar in one quadrant and the mesiodistal weights of its successor. احنا هنشوف بريمولرز أعرض وايدر ولا deciduous molars وايدر. هنشوف الكلام ده في measurement. The sum of mesiodistal weights of the deciduous first and the second molar is greater, خلي بالك, greater than that of premolar, and measure about 2.5 millimeter greater for mandibular quadrant and 1.5 millimeter greater for the maxillary one. What is the function of this space? These spaces aid to relieve crowding in permanent anterior teeth during the development of normal occlusion. When not needed this leeway space. If normal occlusion does not need leeway space, the first permanent molar drift mesially to close this space. هنشوف الكلام ده بالصور بقى. These two deciduous mandibular molars, and the first permanent and permanent canine, and this is the mandibular premolars. The sum of mesiodistal weights of first and second deciduous molar is larger than the mesiodistal weights of premolars by about 2.5 millimeter. This space is generated after extraction of deciduous molars. And this is a space. And when we not need this space for remove of the crowding of anterior teeth, the first permanent molars move mesially and termed drift mesially to close this space. Primate space. Primate space is the space resulted from jaw growth and generated between the maxillary deciduous lateral incisors and the canine from the upper side, and the mandibular deciduous canine and the first deciduous molar from the lower side. Incidence. It occurs in about 70% of the maxilla of the child. Also, it occurs in about 63% of the mandible of the child. Functions. This space helps in placement of the permanent canine in normal class 1 occlusion. Needed for development of offset relation between opposing teeth. ودي هنشرحها في شابتر آخر. Why it is termed primate space? Primate space is similar to that spaces found in primate species with human similarity. نوع من أنواع القرود. and this is the primate space. وبالصورة ديت ننهي المحاضرة النهاردة، وأشكركم جدا جدا على حسن الاستماع، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.